Hello. I figured a video would be the easiest way to demonstrate, I guess, how the loom is assembled and to give you kind of an overview of its parts before I go ahead and start disassembling. I have started labeling most of the parts that require some amount of assembly or disassembly, and it will correspond with the assembly. The parts will correspond with the assembly instructions that are included with this loom. There's just a few sections that I'll pay like close attention to, mostly the brake and warp release assembly, because it is slightly different than the assembly instructions because this is an older loom. And the other big thing of note is that I'm going to be keeping the entire countermarch assembly intact. So you won't need to worry about like reassembling the shafts or reassembling the lambs or anything like that. The only thing I'm going to do is disconnect the treadles to the assembly just because it makes it a little bit easier for transport. But I am going to mark in the textile cords here exactly where the treadles are positioned. And I'll kind of try to film video clips as I'm doing this so that it makes a little bit more sense and has the full context. But yes, I hope that this will be helpful. And I'm going to get started with disassembly, and I will take you along with me as best I can. So the first thing I'm going to get started on is removing the beater. The beater just hangs on these pieces here. These pegs hold the beater height in place, and so they're very important to not lose. And so I'm going to, once I disassemble this, I am going to put these in a little sandwich bag and label that. One thing of note when you go to reassemble the beater and when you're ready for weaving is that you'll know it's the front because there is this little etched emblem, but also you'll want to make sure the channel for the reed is closer to the breast beam. Okay, I apologize if the lighting isn't great back here, but this is what I wanted to show you about disconnecting the treadles. So with the Vevstuga method, there are these knitting needles underneath each treadle that are through specific holes in the textile so that the treadle sits at a very specific height and moves the lambs a very specific distance. And I am going to disconnect the treadles just because it makes moving the countermarch assembly much easier. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the needles, but I'm going to put just a piece of contrasting cotton thread into the holes of the textile where I've placed the needles so that you know exactly where the needles need to be reinserted under each individual treadle because they are all different heights. I would disregard the Sharpie marks. This is the way Vevstuga recommends you at least start, and then you have to make tweaks and adjustments as you adjust your shed. And so where the knitting needles are placed does not exactly correspond with the Sharpie marks exactly. But yes, I will show you what this looks like once I have done it and disconnected the treadles. As you can see, I've now disconnected all the treadles, and I have just one thread going through all 4 pieces of textile connected to the tie-up. So you'll just want to, when you go to tie up the loom and attach the treadles, you'll just want to take the knitting needle and insert it where the thread goes through the hole for each treadle. One thing I want to make note of is there's one last treadle that I have set up as far to the left as it can go, and this is only to counterbalance to add weight to the lower lamb. On what I've read for the older glimakra, the lower lamb and the upper lamb are the same length. And in newer models, they made the lower lamb slightly longer to add additional weight to better balance the loom. And so this is something that Joanne Hall recommends, which is just attaching a treadle to the end of the lower lamb just to add additional weight. And so I just have arrow pegs here in the very last hole. It doesn't really matter the height or anything, so I'll just remove those for now. So the next thing we're gonna do is remove the countermarch assembly. I wanna make note now that there are two pins right here that hold all of these lever bars in place. And so this is very important to not lose these pins and to know where they go. I've added a little note here, but this is gonna remain here so that everything, because if I were to take these out now, this would collapse. So we do not want that. But yeah, this is really important to know when you're just getting the loom set up. In order for me to remove the countermarch assembly, I need to unlock the bars that are holding the lambs in place. And these both have little pins that go through. Apologies, it's a little bit hard to see, but there's holes in these bars where these locking pins go so that this doesn't move. But I'm gonna remove them now so that we can free the lambs. For ease of transport, I've tied the lambs together so they're not flailing around, because now that you see that they're no longer in place, they are no longer secure. But when you go to reassemble, you'll just take your your lamb, I don't know what to call this, your lamb rod, and you'll insert it here. You'll insert it then through the holes of your lambs, and then all the way through to the other side. If I can get it in. And then there will be the hole somewhere. There will be a hole in the bar for you to, oh, there it is. A little hard to see. There'll be the hole here for the locking pin. Okay, so the countermarch assembly has now been removed from the loom. I would highly, highly suggest doing this with two people to make sure to just so that it's a little bit less unruly, especially with the lower lambs, or the upper and lower lambs that are very unbalanced, so they kind of want to flail around. There are locking pins in all the shaft bars, so you don't have to worry about your heddles falling off, but I would just urge you to be as organized and as careful as you can be with moving things around, because it's possible to get into Tangle City. I'm gonna wrap this up very carefully so that everything kind of stays put, but rest assured that everything is very secure. So it might just take a little bit of coaxing to get things untangled, though I don't think there should be many tangles, but yes, would recommend having an extra set of hands for this part. So the next thing I'm gonna do is remove the ratchet wheels, so the cloth beam one and the back beam one. So you do that by using a mallet. You can release the peg and it should slide right off. Before I disassemble the brake assembly, I just want to make sure you understand how it works and how it reassembles. The big difference between this loom and the assembly instructions is that the warp release is not connected to the part that holds the ratchet wheel in place, because in the assembly it has it so that when you lift the warp release, it also lifts this piece so that the ratchet wheel comes free. But on this loom it does not do that, so you have to lift this manually in order to release the cloth beam. It's a little bit finicky, but it still works. And so For releasing the tension on the warp beam, you lift the warp release, which tugs on this string. It goes over this wheel, it goes over this wheel, and then usually the ratchet wheel will be here, and so when you lift the release bar, this will lift up as well. So I'm gonna keep all of this together. I'm just gonna remove the warp release bar and this part from the loom, but I'm gonna keep all of the cord attached to both of those pieces. So the brake assembly has been removed. I'm leaving these little pulleys on because I don't think it will really affect the transport. One thing I just want to note is that the bolt holding in the the warp release is slightly longer than the two bolts that are holding in these pieces. But I think all of that is also covered in the assembly instructions, including the order in which you want to put things, because there's also all of the bolts come with washers and all of that stuff. So the next thing we're going to do is remove the warp beam. These disassemble and are what hold the warp beam in place. There are bolts on the back of these pieces, and so I am going to do that now. I would just take note that the longer piece is the piece that sits on top and the shorter piece sits on the bottom. So with the removal of the back beam, they actually have these long bolts that go all the way through the back of the gable, through these pieces on the top and bottom, and then bolt into place. So now all there's really left to do is to remove these pegs at the bottom and the pegs at the top. And once all those pieces are removed, you're going to be left with just the gables. With the pegs that hold together these bottom pieces, I would highly recommend having someone help you, because sometimes it can be hard to get leverage with the mallet under the peg because you have to hammer upwards. And so it can be helpful for someone to lift the loom so that you can get under it. Also at this point, the loom is going to lose its structural integrity as you remove these cross pieces. So I would highly recommend having another person help you with this part. All right, so here it is fully disassembled. We have the two gables, the crossbars and beams, and here are all the other pieces. All right,